City University Television. In association with the Center for Advanced Study in Theater Arts. And the Clurman Endowment. Presents Spotlight.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Ed Wilson, and my guest is one of our most versatile and accomplished playwrights, Terrence McNally. Terry, welcome.
Thanks. Good morning.
In addition to being a very well-known playwright, you're also vice president, I think, of the Dramatists Guild.
Right.
What exactly is the Dramatists Guild?
Well, the Dramatists Guild is an association of playwrights, librettists, and composers. Unlike everybody else working in the theater, we're not a union. So we have to band together to protect our rights. And the upshot of that really is that we have probably the best contract any writer in the world has. Not one word of our text can be changed without our permission. We have CASTA approval of the theater, director. So whenever a playwright tells you they've ruined my play, they're putting lines in I didn't write, he's not exercising his rights as a member of the Dramatists Guild. It's just not true. They cannot touch a word of our text, which is not true when you work for Hollywood or television.
Oh, it's quite the opposite, isn't it?
Because you've sold your property, and they say, we want this change, and if you don't want to do it, they'll get someone else. But actually what we do is we lease the right to produce our plays to a producer, and in exchange for that, he has to take very good care of the text. And
how long has
that's
the
our main
Dramatists
function.
Guild been going?
We're getting close to our 50th
Really?
anniversary, yeah. It really started out of the, I'm sure you know the story about O'Neill's father paid somebody, I forget the dramatist's name, to write The Count of Monte Cristo, and he paid him like $500 and then performed that poor man's play for the next 45 years and made millions of dollars. It was to prevent that kind of abuse that the Guild got together, because in the old days, an actor-manager would buy a text, commission a play from a writer, and then they owned it lock, stock, and barrel. And so if it ran for 10 years, you got the same amount of money as if it had run for 1 week. And slowly playwrights said, hey, this is not right, and they got together in the 30s, and we've slowly evolved, and we're a much bigger organization. We're a national organization now. We've just come up with a contract for regional theater, so because so much activity, new plays especially, is being done now in regional theater, we felt it was very important to have a standardized contract for our members. And this is to protect an Arthur Miller as much as the young playwright. It's the first time his work is ever being done at a regional theater in Iowa. He should have the same rights as a well-known.
But actually, a lot of, some of our best-known playwrights have been very active in the Dramatists Guild.
Oh, well, the council of the Dramatists Guild is 30, and it's elected by the active membership, and it is 30 of the most prominent people working in the theater now. It's very much a council of working playwrights. It's, unlike some trade guilds, it's a lot of unemployed people who are deciding policy. Our policy, we like to think, is responsive to what's really going on in the theater, because all of our members are very active playwrights, composers, lyricists.
Was there not a contract for regional theater before this?
No, it was, you got as good as you could get, and what we sometimes would happen would be a young playwright was so eager to have his work done, he would sign what frankly was a substandard contract, and say the play does become a success that eventually reaches New York and is done in a wide networking of theaters. If you've signed a substandard contract, nothing's going to change that.
Right.
And
you've got no recourse after
no
that.
recourse, no, once you've signed
How did the regional theaters resist this contract, or?
Well, it wasn't the easiest thing in the world to have. It took us several years
but now
to bring this about.
Now it's been accomplished.
Yes, but what's interesting is because we're not a union, the only way it's enforced is by solidarity. So we're really saying to these theaters, if you don't honor our members' contract, you're not going to be getting new plays from our members. And since our membership is really who makes up the American theater, I think that's pretty powerful. But we cannot call a strike. We cannot.
It's a guild, really, in the almost medieval
sense
of a guild.
It is. But I think a standard contract, it was time for it, and I really don't anticipate any real problems. More importantly, actually, is that we feel a playwright, no matter where he's working, should have the same protection, that his script is not going to be changed, that he has a say in casting, that he has a say in who's directing this play, as he would working in a Broadway theater.
Sure.
So
What about the young playwrights? You must come in contact. Well, you teach playwriting too, don't you?
At NYU, I teach, yes.
So what is your feeling about playwrights coming along, young people coming along, either joining the Dramatists Guild or the people you teach? What are the prospects for the future as far as you're concerned with playwrights?
Well, I think the prospects for earning a living in the theater are difficult. The prospects for working in the theater, I think, are enormously encouraging, more so than when I started. Really? 25, 30 years ago. I'm 51 years old, and I've been working in the theater a good 30 years. Simply in that there is just so original theater. When I began writing, they would not do a play unless it had the seal of approval of the New York critics. They were not about to do a brand new world premiere out in the boondocks. And now these theaters have all realized that they have a commitment to develop American playwrights, because Broadway has really become very cautious. Almost every play running on Broadway now is a transfer from either London or a regional or one of New York City's own not-for-profit theaters, such as Manhattan Theater Club. So these theaters all realize that the future of the theater is with the playwrights, and they better be a part of it. And they've been very aggressive in play contests and actively seeking new scripts, coming to a name writer. I was approached by the San Diego Theater last year, the Old Globe, to do a new play out there. So this was not true when I began writing. You had to say, direct from its 3-year run on Broadway. And of course they've had disasters, and they've had some great successes too. But that's where the vitality of new theater is happening now, is out there, and in the city at our not-for-profit theaters. But Broadway has very much become a place for plays that have been transferred, developed elsewhere. It's very rare now for a play to open cold on Broadway.
One could almost say that's true of off-Broadway, too, because you've had several very successful plays off-Broadway. Lisbon Traviata, Frankie and Johnny and the Claire de Lune, and they started in a not-for-profit situation in New York and then moved to a commercial off-Broadway house.
Absolutely. Well, what I should have said is the commercial theater in New York City is very much the result of productions that have transferred from not-for-profit or regional theater.
Before we leave the young playwright, who you, as I say, come in contact both with the Dramatists Guild and as a teacher, you said that it was very difficult for them to make a living in the theater, and yet there were a lot of opportunities. What are the options that they have? How do they support themselves while they are having their work done in the theater? You're probably one of the few, you could really, on two hands maybe, not many more than that, the playwrights who make a living from their plays. You're really one of the few people, I think, in America who doesn't do a lot of film, a lot of television, who really makes a living from the theater. Isn't that true?
I am. I don't know how many others there are.
Many. Well, you know there are not
many.
I know.
I don't think there are, and I count my blessings every morning. I promise you.
But what about what do you tell a young writer who's starting out, who's really a talented playwright for the theater?
Well, I do believe talented writers achieve the success that is due them. I profoundly believe that. Sometimes doesn't happen as quickly as they deserve or would like. But number one, I don't think anyone goes into the theater to get rich. I think when I say there's a lot of opportunities, they're going to find a receptive theater community to develop their new plays, which was not true. As I said, when I began, it was either Broadway or nothing. I mean, you were competing with Neil Simon and Tennessee Williams. They were going to do their play instead of yours. Now, that has changed. How you earn a living, I think you pull in your belt and you do a lot of things, including driving cabs and waiting tables.
And writing for television, and I presume.
I'm of two minds about that.
Really? Well, how do you feel about that?
Because I think it's a very personal decision, but I think playwriting is a very difficult craft to master, and I think when you start worrying, I'm not very good at putting on two different hats, but I think especially for a young writer, it's so important to find his own voice. And when suddenly you're working with a network telling you you can't say this, you can't do that, you've got to write in 6 to 7 minute segments of time with a powerful climax to get the viewer back, I don't think that's real helpful to developing your skill and your
a
voice as a playwright. So I tell my students, you're better off driving a cab.
Doing something
and
completely different.
Different, and keep the playwriting as something that you really are working on, and you don't sort of corrupt it.
What about film, now, because you just described a television format.
Well,
Would film be the same thing?
I think film is equally difficult to master. Fortunately, I think what happens is most people who really want to work in the theater gravitate somehow to New York City, and people who really want to be screenwriters gravitate to LA real fast. I know a lot of my students at NYU in the dramatic writing program. I'd say almost half of them really want to be screenwriters, and it sort of shows in their commitment to the work. But they take a program in dramatic writing because there are certain elements that are similar in terms of conflict, characterization, what constitutes good dialogue. But finally, I think writing a screenplay is a very different discipline than writing a play.
One of the things you mentioned just a moment ago, you mentioned the Manhattan Theater Club.
Yeah.
And you have had a very close relationship with that particular nonprofit producing organization here in New York City. I presume that has been a very healthy and helpful thing as far as you're concerned. And for any playwright, would you recommend that kind of association, whether it's a regional theater or a New York?
Absolutely. I count my blessings even more of my association with MTC than the fact I've been able to earn a living as a playwright, frankly.
How long have you been involved with it?
Well, only about 4 years. They've done 4 plays of mine in 4 years.
Well, 4 plays, 4 years is a pretty good record.
Yeah, but thank God they came along, because I think a playwright needs a home. I felt like an orphan out there, and because if you have a success, it's nice, but when you don't, everyone sort of drifts away, and there's no sense of community or, development when you're just going from commercial production to commercial production. And I was feeling kind of lonely out there, and I really needed the feeling. For me, it was very important to feel there was a place I could bring my work that was receptive and committed to me as a writer, not is his play going to make us a lot of money or be successful. In fact, Frankie and Johnny really came very much out of the success they had with a play of mine called It's Only a Play. And Lynn said, we will produce the next play you
We
write.
should say Lynn is Lynn Meadow,
Lynn
who's
Meadow,
the artistic director of Manhattan Theater Club.
And she said, I'll produce the next play you write. And that maybe freed me, because God knows Frankie and Johnny was very different from anything I'd ever written previously. And maybe that kind of acknowledgement that what I wrote would be okay, it would be done, freed me a little bit to write that play. I don't know.
Let's back up
sure
just a little bit.
How
was that play different from, how was Frankie and Johnny different from other plays you had written before? It was, but in your own mind, how was it different?
Well, number one, I think it was a frankly much more emotional play than I'd ever written. It was the first time I'd really written about
a love story?
Well, a love story, yes. Also,
we should say that it's a man and woman who are very lonely, who get together.
And it's called blue collar play.
Blue collar, yes.
And I think I was probably better known for writing more sophisticated kind of characters.
Much more, yes.
It was a whole voice in me that I didn't know I had, frankly. It's a more poetic play, for lack of a better word.
Wasn't there a certain irony in this, because you mentioned that the Manhattan Theater Club, Lynn Meadow, had said, do whatever you want, and we'll do it, no matter what it is. And in your mind, probably you suspected this would not be nearly as successful as a lot of your other plays.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that true?
I really thought that maybe they would read it and say, well, we meant that, but not with this one. I really didn't think anyone would even want to produce it when I wrote it. And then we did a small production in stage 2, and I said, that'll be the end of it. Then we did a bigger production in stage 1 and had the critics in, and I said, that'll be the end of it. And then
it became one of your most successful plays.
Yes, and then when I saw it in London, last year on the West End in a big production, I said, this will be the last time. And now I have the movie to look forward to.
Oh, really?
Of it.
Are you going to write the movie version?
I've just finished the screenplay.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, and that's why I think I'm so aware of how different a movie screenplay is from a play, because I put the play totally to one side, and I don't know if there's more than 10 lines from the play that are in the screenplay.
In the screen version?
I really wanted to make something fresh with it, and I also don't think you cannot film that play as it
No,
is.
because it's a very confined, it's in that one
Yeah,
apartment, well, really, one-room
right,
studio
right.
apartment, really.
And I think the use of time is very different in a film. And when someone says, I love you, in close-up you hear it in a different way than you do in the theater. So it's a challenge. I hope I've succeeded. I don't know. I'll be very curious. But
Well, actually, was Lisbon Traviata written before or after Frankie and Johnny?
the first version of it was written before.
So in a way, it has features of both, it seems to me, Frankie and Johnny, in terms of the emotional content of
That's
it.
true.
And because it's a man who's breaking up with his male partner who he's been very emotionally involved with for a long time.
Right.
And this reminds me, I do want to ask you one thing about Lisbon Traviata. We should say that that the people in the play, the main people, are great opera lovers. The title comes from a pirated recording of Maria Callas singing Traviata in Lisbon.
Right.
But in the course of it, one of these men, as I say, Steve, is that his name?
Yeah.
And his longtime partner, Mike, is leaving him. And he's very emotionally involved with this. And at the end of the second act, in the first version of this, and actually this was the way I think it opened with the critics.
It is.
Steve actually stabbed and killed Mike. Is that not correct? And you then changed that. That's rather unusual, isn't it?
I didn't think it was. Everyone else seems to.
Really?
It's a very...
Because in the final version, which ran at the Promenade Theater, he threatened to kill him with a pair of scissors, but did not.
If you want to ask how that came about...
how did it come about?
I found the original ending, the murder, very powerful, but somehow not convincing. It seemed the playwright superimposing a metaphor onto the action.
Is this because it was in such an operatic framework you thought it needed an operatic ending?
Well, and I thought he was jumping into the world of opera and was going to live his life at that level. I think the play is much more painful and tragic now that that gesture is futile and he can't, that most of us don't live at the level of Tosca and La Boheme.
And the man has fallen in love with someone else and just leaves him, which happens
Yeah.
in life all the time. And he, as you say, he's left
Right.
empty there.
And the ending is much more powerful now. And
Do you think audiences respond to it more powerfully now than they did in the earlier one?
Yes, absolutely, because before the murder was so violent, it took them out of the play for the last 2 or 3 minutes. An interesting story there, too, is this play always ended with the character Mendy's calling, and you heard his voice on the answering machine, which gave the play kind of a circular closure to it. And so many people, when they saw the play after I changed the ending, said, "Oh, that wonderful new ending you wrote with Mendy calling." And not one word of that has been changed. Sometimes, you know, when one action is going on, you don't hear the words, and there's somebody was bleeding with his guts on the floor. They didn't hear a word of that.
That completely obscured the end.
They didn't hear any of that, and everyone thought it was something I added after, you know, as part of the change. Also, you see what happened was when I went off to London to see Frankie and Johnny, the play had been on here for about 5 weeks, and I felt a little troubled about the ending. It didn't seem right, and I came back and I saw it, and I said to the cast, "We've got 2 weeks left of the run at Manhattan Theater Club. If 1 week left. If I change the ending, will you come in on your day off and rehearse it?" And they said, "Sure." And then everyone said, "You're so brave to have done this after the play's been reviewed, etc." But it never occurred to me anything other than this is one of the things I like about the theater. I can change the play again tomorrow if I want to. It's got that give and take of real life.
That sort of
Whereas the
flexibility.
movie, once they strike that set and the actors disperse and the film is developed, you can re-edit all you want, but you can't edit a scene that was never filmed the first time around. So I love that flexibility of the theater, and the fact it changes every night. It also can drive you crazy because
Sure.
you do it perfectly on Tuesday and then Wednesday it's not so perfect, and you say, why can't we do it perfect every night? But the other night, like Nathan Lane and Tony Heald and the cast, like surpassed themselves, and I said, how can they be better?
In Lisbon Traviata.
Yeah, because I've seen them do it like beyond anything I could ever imagine, and yet they did it even better. And when I saw Frankie and Johnny in Los Angeles, I remember at the Mark Taper Forum, I said to Kathy Bates and Kenneth Welsh, the original created the parts, I said, New York only got your B+ performances. Where were you hiding this? And just something had happened after taking 6 months off from the play, remounting it in L.A., and Paul Benedict went out and redirected it. and it just had something it never had in New York, and that's what's so glorious about the
Yes.
theater. But of course, you always want the audience to always see the most glorious night.
That great night.
Yeah.
We should say that in Lisbon Traviata, the whole first act is dominated by Mindy, who
Yes.
is a really extreme, flamboyant character, who is the one who is so obsessed with getting hold of the Lisbon Traviata recording.
Right.
And he's a marvelous, I mean, of course, critics have been very excited about both the character and the performance
Yes.
by Nathan Lane.
Yeah.
But that harks back, too, to a lot of your earlier work, which had a lot of satire in it, you were able to depict characters, it seems to me, and turn them up a few degrees on the scale. And you did that in It's Only a Play, a whole group of yours, and I think the Ritz
Yes. Yeah.
take extreme characters and make them very funny. When did you, in terms of your discovering your sort of comic and satirical kind of voice, did you discover that very early on?
I suppose I did, but rather painfully, in my very first play, In Things That Go Bump in the Night, which was certainly on a solemnity scale, one of the most solemn plays ever written. But there was some humor in it, and the audience, I guess despite myself, responded to that. And I used to be very upset that everyone liked the comic scenes, and I wanted them to like the really serious stuff. And that was a 3-hour, 3-act play. That was a long one. Even to this day, some critics are more comfortable with the first act of Lisbon Traviata than the second. And to me, actually, the 2 acts almost are lay it out how I'm perceived of as a writer, a comic writer that people seem to have no trouble with, yet when I try to be more serious or emotional, I feel not as much acceptance. And I'm very proud of the second act of Lisbon Traviata. I don't think there is a dichotomy. I know one act is funnier than the other. I did that on purpose. So when a critic says the first act is so funny and the second act isn't, I say, I know. But I am essentially a comic writer, I think. And how I discovered that was in the first play, and then meeting Jimmy Coco early in my life was a big, because with Jimmy, I learned...
The actor.
Jimmy Coco, the
yes.
actor with Jimmy, and who was in my second play,
Right.
Next. Through
Which was
Jimmy,
a
I
very
learned
funny
that
one-act play.
through humor, but that was a very powerful, very strong play, and a very, I think, strong indictment of values in this country at the time of the Vietnam War. It was more than just funny.
Yes.
And Jimmy taught me, well, I found he was like a spokesman for me. He became it was such a beautiful collaboration. And I think the same thing has begun to happen, particularly with Nathan Lane and myself. I find actors who really know what I write about. It's not that they just hear the way I write. They know the sensibility. They know the points I'm making. And so you never discuss acting or meaning with them. We just
They
worked.
sense it.
It's wonderful.
So that on the one hand, it's almost a counterpart, it sounds like to me, of your relationship to the Manhattan Theater Club. This relationship with individual actors that
Right.
has meant so much to you.
Well, there's like 4 now. The next play I'm writing is for Nathan Lane, Tony Heald, Christine Baranski, and Kathy Bates, who are 4, I think, of the best young actors
Well,
in
they are,
America.
yes.
And they have given me so much joy and enthusiasm. You know, it makes you want to go to the theater and write when you have actors like that waiting for you. And so I thought, I'm going to write a play it's about 2 married couples. And I'm just very excited about it. We're going to do it at Manhattan Theater Club. But to me, theater, it's so lonely when you write the play. You've got to feel there's a friendly room full of people waiting for you when you come out of your own seclusion. I get terribly lonely when I'm writing a play. I enjoy writing it, and my characters keep me very entertained, but I also feel I'm missing a lot of what's going on out there, and I can't wait to be in a room with, but it's got to be great people.
Do you
who
go
can't do it alone.
when a play is in rehearsal, do you go to the rehearsals?
Oh,
right? You
I
love
live,
that process?
I live for rehearsal. I love being in rehearsal, and I revise enormously in rehearsal.
You do?
Sometimes actors think too much, and after a while they say, please, you don't have to come in with new pages every day.
Is this because you hear things, you hear your own words and you decide they can
You
be...
hear things, they inspire you. I mean, a really good actor, a playwright, you know, you sit down and you write and you say, oh, this is a great line or this is a great speech. But a really great actor takes that and lifts it to such another dimension that because a playwright really only hears the line being read, in a funny way we don't sense it being acted in the sense with an activity going on, with they bring another dimension. I can't describe it quite, but I know when I'm in the presence of this kind of
sometimes they convey
enhancement.
things without words that you thought you needed words
Right.
for, I suppose.
And they just, a good actor makes you want to write up to his level. But I never go into rehearsal with a play unless I think it's the best I can get it. I'm not a believer in, oh, we'll fix it in rehearsal.
No, yes.
But I found we do make it better in rehearsal, and just wonderful things happen, and it becomes three-dimensional. When you're writing it at the best, it's two-dimensional when I'm sitting there.
Right.
And no matter how much you think you've learned, you still learn more every time you have a rehearsal with a good actor.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I did want to ask you about writing musicals. You wrote the book for the Rink. You've been working on Kiss of the Spider Woman.
Right.
And is Saratoga a play or a musical?
Saratoga is a play.
Is a play.
It's got some period music in it, but it's definitely
But tell
a
me
play.
briefly about working on musical as opposed to a straight play.
Well, I've always loved musicals. As a kid growing up, my parents used to have show albums and come back from New York. I grew up in Texas, and they always had programs of South Pacific and Kiss Me Kate. And it's, again, I think in the ideal world, people would say, in life, I am going to be a musical comedy librettist. I think it's that difficult, and you should devote the 80 to 90 years allotted you to becoming the best musical librettist. But we all think we can write plays, write musical comedies, write television, write films, and it's very, very, very hard. I don't know what it's like other than you hope to get a motor running that a composer and lyricist can sort of slide in there and write a song. It's terrible when it just stops to sing a song. It's a very mysterious process, and I think the choice of subject is so important in a musical. And for example, Spider Woman, I think, is a very good idea for a musical. We shall see when it goes into rehearsal.
But it must be very important to work very closely with the composer and librettist.
Yes, and it's collaborating in the writing process, which is very different than collaborating with actors when you've already finished. My experience with musicals has been with Kander and Ebb, John Kander and Fred Ebb, who are wonderful to collaborate and very generous. They ask me to write things as a play, and then they find things to musicalize. So I don't write, Mary sings a song about how happy she is. That doesn't mean anything to them.
Right.
So I write a scene in which Mary talks about how happy she is, and they ideally find a song there. Sometimes they say, you haven't given us anything we can musicalize. Then it's back to the drawing boards.
On that musical note, we have to end. Thank you for being here,
Thank
Terry.
you.
My guest has been Terrence McNally. This has been Spotlight. Thank you for being with us.